Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. Today we are trying out a camera that I think is the first interesting camera, like genuinely interesting camera that Fuji have made now for 2 or 3 years, and that is this. This is the little Fujifilm X-M5. I've been a little bit bored recently of Fuji just taking the same sensors out of the X-H2S and the X-H2 and basically just applying them to every camera body that they already have. It makes reviewing a little bit boring. Now, I'm not saying that this is actually all that different to some extent, because this is a 4-year-old sensor in a 9-year-old body. But importantly, the XM1 that this replaces is old enough that it predates my experience with Fujifilm. So to me, this actually feels like a new camera, but it does have the sensor of an X-T4. Let's quickly talk about the build and design of this camera then. I think the easiest way to think about this camera is it's an XE camera without an EVF or optical viewfinder. So this camera has nothing to look through. You're going to be using this screen on the back. Now, a lot of people will say the screen on the back isn't particularly great. I haven't really had any problems with it at all. Just go into the settings and boost the brightness, because by default it is a little bit dark on a bright sunny day. Not that I'm going to struggle with that today. Now, when it actually comes to how it feels, it definitely feels like one of Fuji's cheaper cameras. It's kind of hard to explain, but things feel a little bit like plasticky and maybe a little bit clicky. Like the buttons don't feel all that great when you click them. You can definitely tell it's on the cheaper end of lineup. It doesn't feel like an X100V or like an X-T5. It definitely feels more like an XE line camera. Now, the screen on the back does also flip out. So Fuji talk about this being a vlogging camera. We're going to talk about why I don't think it's a particularly good vlogging camera later. It's mainly due to the fact that it doesn't have IBIS. Inside, as we mentioned earlier, the sensor is a X-T4 sensor, so we know exactly how that should perform. 3 years ago, this was Fuji's flagship sensor, now in this tiny little camera body. Now, because of its small size, I do find one-handed operation is actually a little bit awkward. If you're running it in auto and you're just firing the shutter, then it's fine. But if you need to like move dials and settings, it's actually quite hard to do. And I find myself using 2 hands instead. The only other thing that's worth noting today, which is a bit of a pain because it is raining today, is that this camera isn't weather sealed. For its price point, not many cameras are, but it would have been nice to see. It would have made it an even better everyday carry camera. And I think this small compact size leads into this being a very good everyday camera, but a bit of weather sealing would have been nice. I think a lot of everyday cameras lack weather sealing, and it's frustrating. I would have paid an extra bit of money if they had sealed it, but would it have crept too much into their other cameras in their lineup? Maybe. But yeah, overall, the build and quality, it's okay. It's not the best of Fuji, but at the same time, the small size and lightweight is 2 big wins that come from it being a little bit cheaper made. Now, when it comes to performance with this camera, it feels like Fuji went a little bit mad. Now, I know it can seem like a downside that this camera has a sensor of an X-T4 because it's quite old. It's like 3 or 4 years ago. But 3 or 4 years ago, this was Fujifilm's flagship sensor. So we are getting one of their best sensors they've made in a camera that's now, I think, the cheapest in their lineup. Now, what they have done is basically given you every single spec that the X-T4s came with, plus everything that Fuji have released in the last few years. It is an absolute powerhouse of a camera. We've got 4K video, we've got 4K 60, we've even got 6.2K open gate. You can shoot open gate footage with this camera. That's something that's reserved in other camera brands lineups for like pro tier stuff. Sony, I don't even think give it to us yet. The downside with video, I think, is going to be overheating. I'll do a couple of tests and I'll put them up on the screen now because it is a small compact camera. But the fact you have these modes there is honestly a big win. When it comes to photography, we know how good this sensor is. It is a very good sensor, which is now combined with all of Fuji's new autofocus settings. So from a photography point of view, I actually find Fujifilm autofocus to be more than good enough. I know people give it a lot of kind of abuse in terms of Sony and things like that, but for photography, to be honest with you, I've never had a problem. My problems have been more related to video, where when it loses focus for a couple of seconds, that it really does cause a problem because you're recording the whole time. Photography, honestly, nuts. Fuji have literally just chucked absolutely everything at the cheapest camera in their lineup. And honestly, I think that deserves a little bit of props to Fujifilm that they've done it. They've not worried about, oh, I wonder how this will affect sales of other cameras in the lineup. They've literally thrown the kitchen sink at it. it is impressive the specs that this little camera has. Now this X-M5 is my first Fujifilm camera that has a simulation dial. Now my understanding or guess at how this dial worked and how it actually works in practice are two completely different things. Now, if you have a look at the dial, on the dial you have most of your popular Fuji simulations and 3 custom modes. Now the way this dial works is it doesn't matter what you have set in the menus, if you turn this simulation dial to a simulation, it hard overrides it. The only way you can actually set the simulation in the settings is if you have it on the setting C, which then lets the menu decide what simulation you're using. You then have 3 custom film simulations on the dial, 3 FS modes. Now this is where I was a little bit disappointed because I thought what I could essentially do here would be set up 3 recipes from online like Fuji Weekly or one of my own. But no, these 3 settings are only there to give you the option to set a simulation they couldn't fit on the dial, or 3 simulations that you do like that are on the dial to be next to each other. Because importantly, these FS modes do not carry any settings other than the film simulation. So you can't set things like white balance, the highlights, the shadows, the clarity. You can't set any of that. So that means that if you actually do want to set up some recipes in this camera, then you have to use the normal mode dial, where you can set up 3 custom modes with the full set of settings, and then you'll leave the film simulation dial on C so that it doesn't hard override your recipes. Which for me means I have a dial on this camera that I would never use. I would only ever have it in the C mode. So at that point, you might as well get rid of the dial and give me something else. So for me, it's a complete waste of a dial. If you're somebody who thinks you'll only use the built-in Fuji sims, then it makes sense. If you want to use recipes, then it doesn't make sense. I do wonder sometimes if Fuji understand what made them so popular with the whole recipe thing. I think they think it's purely their simulations and not all the other settings that go with it. It's a little bit bizarre. I wish you could set up full recipes on that dial and then I'd absolutely love it, but you can't. Just seems like a bit of a missed opportunity that maybe it could be fixed through firmware. I don't know, but yeah, a little bit of an odd one, that. One thing that's always so hard to put like a tangible value on is how important it is to have a small compact camera at times. Today, I'm having way more fun than normal because I'm recording a full YouTube video with a DJI Osmo Pocket 3, tiny, and this little X-M5. It's sometimes really hard to put a value on pocketability. And note that I don't actually have a camera bag with me today. I am literally putting both of these in my pockets. I know I've got a big coat pocket, to be fair, because it's 23mm, it's not the smallest lens in the world. But if you had the 27mm f2 on here, or one of these sort of small compact lenses that TT Artisans and 7 Artisans make, this would be a truly pocketable camera. And this little combination is really adding to the fun I'm having today. It's so hard to put like a tangible number or spec to it, but having a small pocketable camera in the right circumstances can really improve how much fun you have there when you're out shooting. Well, today is a new day because it started to chuck it down, and to be honest, I'm a fair weather photographer, and it was a fair weather camera, to be fair. Neither the Pocket 3 or this little X-M5 are going to be good in heavy rain. So it is actually now the next day. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to try out vlogging mode on the X-M5 because I think Fuji like to talk about this being a very good vlogging camera. So let's switch then from the Pocket 3 over to the X-M5 now. Now Fuji in their promo material talk a lot about this camera making a really good vlogging camera because of its small size and its flip out screen. There is however a little bit of a problem, and that's the fact that this camera doesn't have IBIS, and it means you have to use optical and digital stabilization for it to actually kind of give you a smooth image. Now this lens I'm using is the 15 to 45mm kit lens that comes with the camera, and it does have optical stabilization, and I'm using the digital stabilization as well, but it does come at a hefty 1.32 times crop. This 15mm right now is a full arm's length away from me, and I'm still taking up most of the frame. It's a very, very tight image. Now if that works for you, you can kind of base it off this video. For me, this feels way too tight that I'd want a different lens. And then that means you've got to look at optical stabilized lenses that are wider. And unfortunately, you don't have many choices. I think you'd end up having to go for the 10 to 24mm f4 lens. That is a lens that is the same price, the same weight, and the same size as the X-M5 itself. So I'm not fully on board with the fact that this makes a good vlogging camera just because it's lacking IBIS, and you really have to lean in to this digital stabilization, which is a pain because it is such a hefty crop. Did you see that? Something a bit weird happened there, didn't it? Did you notice that it like jumped in and out a couple of times? I also had this happen in a couple other clips. Now I think the good news is I think it's because the exact lens that I had on the day actually was broken or faulty, because I think it's the optical stability just not handling my footsteps. A month or so ago, back in early December, I had the same camera and lens combination hired for 2 weeks, and I did extensive vlogging tests, some of which I'll stick up on the screen now as some examples, and I didn't experience this issue once, but I could consistently experience it with the one I had just last week. Now, I do think this might say something about the reliability of these cheap 15-45mm XC lenses. They do feel cheap, nasty, plasticky, and I now have an example of one that looked to be okay, but I'm pretty sure was faulty. One thing I do find with this camera still is it's big enough that my brain sometimes wants to put it up to my eye to take pictures. I feel like with things like the Ricoh GR3, I never really had that problem, because it was small enough for my brain to kind of know that it was a compact camera. Whereas I do feel like this is borderlining on that size where it feels big enough that it should have an EVF. So I do find myself at times wanting to put the camera up to my eye, but it's just something that you'd get used to over time. But it's definitely big enough that it could warrant one. I do think more brands should consider doing like the Sony RX line of cameras do, where they've got like a little pop-up one. I'd love that, to be honest with you. Do you know what? I think this is one of my easiest camera conclusions for a little while. This camera is nuts. For the price, it is an absolute powerhouse of a camera. Personally, I've got a lot of value out of having such a small camera again. Even with my M cameras, they can be quite big. This little guy is tiny with some ridiculous specs, both from a photography and video point of view. I think I'd actually recommend some people get this as their first camera if they want to get into sort of like travel and document their life. This thing might actually be the choice for you, because it's really hard to pick holes in it. Fuji gave this camera just about everything they possibly could. I think as long as you understand the limitations of not having IBIS, especially when it comes to video and what a digital stabilization and the crop means for you, then I honestly think you'll be very happy with this camera. Am I going to go out and buy one? Not personally. I've got the DJI Pocket and I do like my M cameras, so I don't think I need this in my lineup. And I've still got the X100V and X Pro 2, and there's enough overlap there that I don't need one. But that doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed using it over the last couple of weeks. It's genuinely, I think, Fuji's most exciting camera in the last like 3 or 4 years. I think the X-H2S was the last time a camera came out from Fuji that I was actually interested in other than this. So yeah, that's my conclusion. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. We've been out and about a little bit more as well today, which I have enjoyed as well. And again, this camera was an enabler of that because it's small and compact. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.